All right. Hello, everybody. Is this on? All right. I know it's late and don't want you guys to fall asleep. I am intending this to be an engaging and interesting conversation with the audience as well. So I want to be able to see when you guys are looking confused or giving me smirks. So thank you so much to the Puget Sound Estuarium and the library for hosting this event. As Clarissa mentioned, doing community outreach is part of my job. So this is a great opportunity, and I hope you'll be so excited. You'll find some more opportunities to share some of this information in your own community. So because we are not in the Chehalis River Basin tonight, I am going to, start out by giving you some information to who I am, since I'm going to be with you for an hour. You'll probably wonder who's talking to you. Then I will talk about where the Chehalis Basin is and make sure everybody understands this idea of basin, period. I know it's kind of a wonky word. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening for restoration across the geography that is the Chehalis. And then the highlight is the Scatter Creek. Where did the water go? That's the thesis that we're going to answer tonight. I'm very excited to roll that out. And just a few brief points on future restoration efforts and how you can be involved. So first of all, my watershed story begins with my parents, who are in the audience here tonight. So very happy to have them here. I've been working with freshwater environments through research and investigation for most of my career and education. Love being out in the river, and this has taken me across North America and South America at work. I have a couple degrees, one from Western in Bellingham and a master's in resource management in the University of British Columbia. And I've also been able to do field work in Costa Rica as well as Canada, assessing water quality, stream health, wetland function, etc. So got my feet wet and muddy and enthusiasm for this topic in my youth. And then for the past 16 years, at least the last 10 in the Chehalis, been really interested in people and working with those people that are interacting with the landscape and can make a difference. So in addition to the research, trying to figure out how we can manage ourselves, how we can do better to protect natural resources that we depend on. And the two groups I work for now are those little logos in the bottom right. I'm not messing with this the whole night. So where is the Chehalis Basin? So basin is another word for watershed. That, water drop starts at the top, goes out to the ocean. That's the definition of a watershed. So most important thing, it's not in the Puget Sound. This is the Puget Sound Estuarium. So thank you for expanding your boundaries a little bit and learning about this non-Puget Sound estuary. You can imagine this dark blue area, that's the Chehalis Basin. If you tilted it on its side, it would take up most of that block that is the Puget Sound. So imagine driving all the way to Bellingham. You're still in the Chehalis Basin if you were driving across our watershed. So a really, really big area. We're one of the coastal watersheds that flows directly to the Pacific Ocean. And we like, giving our credentials. It's like a big fish story. We like to say that we're the second largest in the state, with the first largest being the Columbia, kind of a distant second, but we're doing it. Another important fact for the understanding of the basin and Scatter Creek is it's rain dominated. So you hear a lot about climate change and how it's going to affect our watersheds, and that's by affecting snowpack. That's not really the context of our basin. We don't have any year-round glaciers. Everything that comes to the river comes through rain and not through a big permanent snowpack. And also an important factor is there's no endangered species listed salmon. So I hope that's bragging rights. Interestingly, it kind of means less funding sometimes, but it's also bragging rights because we can still protect what we have without having to recover what we've lost. So before I move on from this kind of visual, maybe everybody can self-identify as living in the Chehalis watershed. Does anybody? I got 1 nod, 2 nods, 3 nods. Okay. 4 nods. Awesome. Good. So we're not just Puget Sound here. Fantastic. Then, okay, that could be a broadening if you play or travel or work. So watershed threats, just kind of synopsis of what our watershed is facing. So we don't have those listed species yet, but most certainly have diminished salmon runs. The numbers vary, but you can see that abundance of important species like a spring Chinook has declined significantly from just 100 years ago. So something's going wrong. We're not in a perfect state for these watersheds. And looking to the future, we've got climate change already here, bringing us warmer winters, drier summers, and severe storm events. As I was driving to this event tonight, I kind of felt like I was in a car wash. It was like, that's what our winter events are going to be like from now on under climate change. And we are experiencing legacy land use impacts. I have a slide that shows kind of what those are. Current land use impacts and increasing threats from current land use. So a couple of things I'm talking about. You know, we tend to blame our current practices for causing a lot of the damage to our watersheds, but we've been at it for a while. This picture in the upper left is splash dam. So that's how they got logs out of the system when they were logging. They dammed up the rivers filled with water and tried to float the logs down, but that was not great for the conditions fish need. So clear-cut logging up to stream edges, not so good for the health. Putting roads across about, let's see, my current stat is that there's 2,500 barrier culverts in the Chehalis Basin. So those all come from logging roads predominantly and other roads that didn't understand the concept that rivers need more than just a tiny bit of water getting underneath them through a small culvert. Agriculture leaves some lasting impacts, and stormwater in more urbanized environments. So we've got a lot of threats that we've got to compensate for if we're going to bring back these salmon runs to some of their historic levels. So every story needs a dragon and a princess. So what I just told you was the dragon. These are the problems that we have in our watershed. What do we have as our princess? We have so many princesses in the Chehalis. We're extremely lucky. All the groups listed here represent agencies or organizations that are trying to address one or more of those legacy watershed impacts, spanning kind of expected parties that you might think are doing that, tribes, conservation districts, but also ports and counties are working on addressing these issues. So the three groups I'm most involved with are kind of overarching groups. So the group that kind of started thinking about these issues 25 years ago, when first listings of salmon were coming out, was the Chehalis Basin Partnership. That group said, hey, we've got to kind of work together a little better and coordinate some disparate efforts for habitat restoration. That coalesced in our lead entity group, which is newly renamed the Chehalis Basin Collaborative for Salmon Habitat. Very descriptive of what we do. We're collaborating for improving the habitat of these salmon. And a really big player on the scene right now is Office of the Chehalis Basin. It sounds a lot more formal. That's a state agency run effort that brings a lot of money to restore these salmon runs. And they funded the main story I'm going to tell you tonight about Scatter Creek. So that's an example of how they're able to fund efforts in the basin right now. Oops. So in short, that last section is showing you there's problems in the basin, both legacy practices and climate change. A lot of committed individuals that are enthusiastic about restoring conditions for streams, and overarching organizations that are bringing people together to do that work. This is a group of Grays Harbor College students evaluating a fish passage project a couple of years ago. So a little more academic here is watershed planning. That's one thing I work on a lot. Under the umbrella idea that you need to know what's broken in order to fix it. And you need a plan that kind of brings all the information together that says both what's wrong, how to fix it, who's going to do it, who's going to fund it, etc. And you need to think about history a little bit, and scientific knowledge, and traditional knowledge, and local knowledge, and all roll that up into thinking about these restoration efforts. And being that this is very solution focused based work, really the end goal is to find solutions to problems. So the next section of the talk is going to be about Scatter Creek, as I mentioned. So this effort happened through a group of dedicated scientists, stakeholders, and citizens under the guise of the Scatter Creek Subcommittee. I might mention that word or that name, and if I do, that's what I'm talking about. So a group of folks working on restoration planning specific to Scatter Creek. All right, so any lack of clarity on the last topics before I transition into this section? You got where the Chehalis is? We got some Chehalis residents. All right. So Scatter Creek, where did the water go? These two pictures illustrate the point that Scatter Creek sometimes has water and sometimes it's really dry. I heard some of my audience members already talking about observations they made this summer when they were surprised to come across this totally dry creek bed. It's not what we think of as a creek. It's something that's dry. We think of a creek as having water. So this zooms in a little bit on the Scatter Creek watershed, which is within the Chehalis Basin. As I was driving to work the other day, I was reminded that most people probably think of Scatter Creek as a Scatter Creek rest area. You're driving up I-5, oh, there's a Scatter Creek rest area, finally, I can pull off. So next time you're at that rest area, that's where Scatter Creek crosses under I-5. So you can't really see it from the freeway, but if you stopped at that rest area, you might be able to find it. So that kind of orients you to where it is in the south, north-south orientation. It also includes the city of Tenino and the town of Rochester in the west. So a couple facts about Scatter Creek itself. Really unique aspect of this creek is its close connection between surface water and groundwater. They're very interacted, they're very connected. Sometimes the water that's at the ground comes up to the surface, sometimes it goes below. So I was, trying to talk about this with this gentleman here. It's just basically a bathtub that sometimes the creek dips into the groundwater, sometimes it's higher up and does not connect to the groundwater. So very closely connected. Also, it serves as a drinking water source. So, we turn on our faucets at home. People that live in Scatter Creek, they turn on their faucet that's coming from the aquifer underneath the Scatter Creek watershed. And our stat was that there's about 18,000 Thurston County residents that rely on this aquifer for their water. So big important human water sources. Also home to native salmon. And I would say known for drying in spots between July and November.
Quick question. What's the blue underground, the dark blue?
Confining layer. It's like a clay layer between the shallow aquifer and deeper aquifer. So that's an important concept too. So historic observations, this was a really cool part of this research that we were able to have funded as part of the project I was telling you, was kind of digging into what the history of this area is in relation to stream flow. So we had one of our volunteers who may be in the audience that provided childhood memories from a relative, William Brewer. He grew up on the property that's now that WDFW Scatter Creek Wildlife Area. I was talking to you guys, I think that's the more western unit that used to have an old house on it, but that burned down a couple of years ago. And there's a nice walking trail right along the creek there. So that was a private farm with these folks that have been there since the 1850s and earlier. They donated it to DFW to be a wildlife preserve. So I'll read you this quote in case you can't read it, from 1850. Here on the prairie, grass was stirrup high and the creek was available for water without any effort on the part of either the rancher or the stock. So that speaks to some abundant water. When is stock going to need water? Probably not when it's downpouring. They're probably going to need water in the summer. So that kind of gives me a little hint that there was probably some water year round, or at least most of the year for these farmers. A different historic figure, a family that is named, James Road is named after, so that's a prominent road through the watershed. They speak kind of to the biological benefits. So the creek is so full of salmon that our sons can catch them without ease. So that's really an often said observation from these historic records, is really the abundance of salmon. And in this case, Scatter Creek was no different. And what does she say? She says, "We are blessed with the most beautiful springs of water I ever saw." Cool. So that probably implies it was pretty clear and blue. I know when I see water that's all brown, I'm not inspired. I don't want to drink it. As humans, we like clear water. That's the best way for water to be. So observations, there's water probably in the summer and it is clear. And no known records from that family of the creek going dry. So there's a pretty cool photo, came up from some archives, and it shows school children. Yes, they're wearing really long formal dresses, but these are children out in Scatter Creek near the James Road Bridge. And this is from 1910. So I think this picture has been used for people to say, oh, well, Scatter Creek's always been dry. Look at that. They're out probably, you know, it's not exactly midsummer. They're wearing pretty long clothes, but there's not a bunch of water. But kind of thinking about those historic observations, maybe there was times that even before this, when there was already, when there was more water. Right. So we're basically saying that, okay, something happened between the 1850s and 1910. So I'm going to try to get into what that might have been. James Road is just a county road just south of Rochester. It parallels the highway there. So here's one of my volunteers out looking at that wildlife refuge this last September. First time we've seen it go totally dry. So we're facing conditions where there's less and less water in this creek. And importantly, to kind of my thesis about river restoration and why we're trying to recover salmon, what does this less fact that there's less water mean to fish? And I try to hammer home, there's no habitat if there's no water. Fish need water. So we talk about doing habitat restoration. We can do all the wonderful projects we want, but if there's no water in the creek, then fish aren't doing so well. So I promise not too many graphs in this presentation tonight. The next slide is very graph heavy, but we're going to walk through it. And sorry, I don't have a pointer to show you guys. I'm going to go away from the microphone because so basic graph. Here's the year, is January, February, March, April, etc. This is cubic feet per second, but just think about this as water depth over different times of year. So kind of looking at this, it's raining right now, water depth goes up and down. This J is June, this J is July. Really bottoms out there. And so, whoops. When are the fish there? This is a juvenile salmon that was found dead in that pond I just showed you in about July. So if there's no water in July, juveniles that are trying to grow there are not going to do so well. And right now we are in November. This is when the adult coho might come back. Here comes this coho. He's confused. He says, wait, I'm going to be under this creek in the water. What's going on? So we know that the coho are coming back about this time of year, October, November. But what do we see here? It's this wall. There's no water yet back in the creek, that lower area. So the drying periods, we need to think in proportion to when these different life stages of fish are trying to use the system. Does that graph kind of make sense a little bit? Okay. So yep, here's an example. That fish kill happened in July. Pool dried out and got pretty warm and lethal temperatures for salmon. So here's a question everybody's been asking. What on earth is happening? Who's at fault? Here's our criminal. So we're gonna do a little, try to figure out who this criminal is in this watershed that's causing these issues. So I'll talk through each of the possible culprits. one at a time. So I'll let you look at them and maybe form an opinion in your own head about which of those culprits is responsible for this.
Lake on the upper right, is that Macintosh?
Lake McIntosh, yeah. All right. Well, let's dive into what possible culprit could be. Look at that. So I'll start with this lake. That kind of goes back in history the farthest. It's also the thing that our study figured the least about. So we need another study or some students. I'd love it if some students would get involved in this to kind of dig into that history a little bit more. So we learned that this historic map, this is 1855. Whoa. Sorry, probably hard to see. Here's Tenino. Here's kind of some wetlands, and here's some little tributary streams drawn up here. Here's the lake. Lake McIntosh, it was called Clear Lake back then, with some little tributary streams kind of tickling its feet. So what we learned is that early 1900s, date again unknown, that could have been that time between 1855 and 1910 where that mystery loss of flow happened. We know that there was a diversion put in to feed Deschutes. So your beautiful Deschutes River that does drain to the Puget Sound now has all this wonderful water from Lake McIntosh that is not going to Scatter Creek. So this is the, I mean, they probably wanted one for their fish hatcheries and fish production Deschutes. Again, this is the part of this mystery I know the least about. So if there's real history buffs out there that want to dig into it, come talk to me. Or if you know any students that need a nice project, I think this would be a fun one. Go interview some old timers, see what when that happened and where they would have diverted that lake. Okay. So that's one of our culprits. We can't put it in jail yet. We don't know for sure how much of that water was stolen and how much of an impact it had. Let's see. Yep. So as our report cited early 1900s when the flow was cut off. So next one in sequence, actually this other one is probably a little bit earlier even historically. Loss of beaver. You guys are Puget Sound experts. You've probably had a presentation or two about beaver. I know my mother has seen some good presentations about beaver in the Nisqually area. So what's one reason beaver are important for watersheds?
Slow down the water.
They slow down. And when there's water longer on the landscape, it has more time to get back into the groundwater or be released slowly into the creek. So this picture here is actually an aerial photo that was taken during this project with a drone. Those annoying little things that buzz around your head. Taken with a drone, they're really useful for science. There's a dam right here. So really important function of keeping water on the landscape longer. Fish and beavers evolve together. So yes, fish can get around beaver dams. Really important coexistence of salmon and beaver. But people didn't like beaver. Why? Because they leave too much water on the land. That's not good for farming. So a huge history of killing off the beaver up till this day. There's still policies in place to remove beaver as considered a nuisance. Sometimes they relocate them when we're lucky. Other times they kill them. So beaver are not the heroes that they should be recognized to be, unfortunately, in these areas. So going back to kind of the thinking about you're making a watershed plan, you need to understand what was broken with the system in order to fix it. So that's kind of what we're going through all these different problems to understand how to fix it. And this one is often cited as the way to fix watersheds. All right, if killing the beaver was the problem, bringing the beaver back is probably the solution. And when you can't bring the beaver back because people still kill them, you do some other techniques and interventions that are going to kind of imitate their behavior. So this is another fun one that needs probably a master's of hydrology student to get involved with. So if you know any students looking for a thesis, super interesting potential culprit. So the scientist involved in putting this forward as a culprit, calls it stream seal puncture. I tried looking up this in AI and it was not there. It didn't figure it out. It gave me lots of engineering things about, seals and, plumbing and things like that. There's no stream seal puncture. So you can think about that graphic I showed earlier, close connection between surface water and groundwater. You dig a ditch, you make a hole in that clay layer, and then the water just drains out to that lower groundwater layer, and it's not available in that closely connected surface water exchange area anymore. So yeah, I'll read what it says because it's kind of hard to articulate it. Once the water table is lowered below the stream bed, the hydrologic connection is broken. If the stream bed lacks a more impermeable layer of sediment, then stream flow will infiltrate into groundwater and not come back. So we know that this area was heavily ditched for agriculture. Given how shallow that clay layer is, this is probably contributing to some loss of.
So what part of the watershed?
We need that student to figure it out. I said I'd love a researcher to come figure that out. So the hypothesis is that it would be anywhere that was historically drained and ditched. So that could be
more likely to be towards the Black River area.
So Scatter Creek isn't, it's right next to Black River, but not the same watershed. So it's just south of there. But I'd say any of the low agriculture lands in the Scatter Creek watershed would be, potential culprits. And I can show you on that map later where the scientist thinks there's a couple of potential areas where that happened. But yeah, it's a very strange culprit, but what do you do about it? It's kind of a bigger problem with that particular problem. So the next one, wells. Probably a couple of you guys had that in your head as a culprit as we looked at that first list. So this has come to prominence in your state government. Probably this is far enough ago, but the capital budget wasn't released for a few months because there was fighting about how to deal with what are called permit exempt wells. So those are private wells on these more rural lands because they'd never been regulated. It was just go ahead, dig a well. We know it's a small property. You're not going to use very much. You don't need a permit from the Department of Ecology to do that. More people on the land, pretty soon, a small straw sucking becomes a pretty big problem when you got lots of straws. So the legislature put in a lot of funding and time to understand the extent of the problem that these wells are causing on our water table and providing funding to mitigate those problems. So now that I've got you guys trained in boring graphs, this one, this is time, this is 1860, this is Anna James talking about the salmon leaping and her son's going out and having fun. Here's McIntosh Lake, probably being diverted. Whoa, baby boom, people go off to war, have babies, come back. Oh my gosh, we're getting a bunch more wells. So great increase in this watershed. This is actually quantified that there'll be about 2,500 wells completed by 2020 when the study was done. So we're up higher there even than that time period. So wells probably taking a lot of that water out of that shallow surface water, groundwater interaction area, which is right where stream flow is needed. And people want to live close to a creek. So probably there's a lot of houses that are built along the creek that are responsible for some of this drawdown. Put this next graphic in to say that while these kind of, permit exempt wells, as I've been calling them, are significant, they're only about 13% of the irrigation or the total water use from human uses. We've got wells used commercially, we've got wells used for irrigation, we got public water supply and industrial. So all of those graphs were probably going up about the same rate as our domestic wells, right? So we can say, yeah, we probably have a big impact of these kind of rural domestic wells, but all these other types are probably also leading to that drawdown as well.
So the numbers, is that withdrawal?
Consumptive water use. That's water used and that doesn't come back into the system. That doesn't go back into the system. So it evaporates, it goes off into the atmosphere. And that's per percent of the total water use in the pie chart.
I guess I don't understand what the number is. Like 322.7 on that, or 322.7 miles, gallons?
Acre feet per year, APY. It's some unit of water quantity. Yes. All right. My tech, it doesn't say acre feet. Yeah, it's a quantity. We're thinking about this in relative portions, not the actual amount. But if we're going to solve the mystery, we need to go into these actual amounts and compare them between culprits to be able to really figure out what's the biggest consumptive use. So this one probably seems the most weird. It makes sense. Maybe a lake would have stolen it. Maybe wells would have drawn it down. Maybe the stream seal is kind of weird. Grass is everywhere. Grass has always been everywhere. How on earth could it be a problem for water use? So I've been thinking about this as a problem just in this last, week or so. I've been thinking about this presentation. Old William out on his horse, he says the grass is stirrup high. So you're on a horse, you're a 6-foot man, let's say, you're on a horse. Where are your stirrups? They're somewhere down here. Who's a equestrian? Okay. That's pretty high. You know how this is reed canary grass. This is our culprit here. It's this high. You can easily walk through it and you're surrounded by grass as a 5.5-foot person. So William on the prairie running through with his horse, grass was about like this. Today, this really dominant grass in the Scatter Creek Basin is pretty high. So I don't know when exactly reed canary grass was introduced to the Pacific Northwest, but yeah, it's really, really prominent. It's not native. I think, would it be called invasive?
It's not native.
No. Yeah. It's I think the definition is between invasive and noxious. Like noxious kind of means you can still do something about it, like by putting it on the noxious list. This is so prevalent. There's no way to completely eradicate it at this point. So, yeah. So here's another graph. Oh gosh, I promise not too many graphs. I think this is my last graph. Bulrush, cattail, nettle, snowberry, thistle, wild rose. So some shrubs are shown here on the x-axis, and the amount of water they consume. So consumptive water use goes up through their little stems out into the atmosphere. And I have this range. Here's our units. Moles of water per meter squared. Precise like a minute man. Here's reed canary grass. It's just out of the park compared to these other ones. So it's been really good at drinking water and turning it into atmosphere. You just think of it now. I talked about those wells as little straws that are everywhere. I've been thinking about wells as straws for years. Now I'm going to think about canary grass as straws because it's just drinking water. And where does it grow best? It grows in these muddy areas. So yeah, here's an expert. Reed canary grass thrives in well-lit areas that are wet without constant year-round deep flows. So it makes the intermittent flow of Scatter Creek prime habitat. So it's kind of like maybe the stage was set by these other things that took away water to make this really shallow intermittent flow perfect for this invader. Now comes in and dominates. And now continuing furthers the problem by taking more water right out of the creek. So here's just a visualization about how extensive it is. So the width of this stream here that you can see, that lighter brown, is reed canary grass. It's just a little, it's dead in this picture because this is kind of more of a wintry picture. So our researchers conducted aerial surveys along publicly accessible roadways for this study and found it prevalent between River Mile 2 and River Mile 18. So 16 miles along the length of this creek, which is most of the creek, reed canary grass is present. So probably a culprit now. Let's lock it up. There's another one in the time scale, aquaculture. So how could we have aquaculture in the middle of an urban rural landscape? You think of fish pens in the Puget Sound. That's what I thought of. So there's a company that runs fish pens in the Puget Sound. They also ran an aquaculture facility in the middle of the Scatter Creek watershed right by the wildlife area that you guys walk at. So if you look on Google Earth, which is this next picture, looks like a little alien. This is where the invasion of the body snatchers came from, you know, like they're really growing in these things. So this is a aquaculture facility. I don't remember what species of fish it was. I think it was Atlantic salmon. So they never connected them to the creek. They just grew them in pens and sent them out for food. So this aquaculture facility, again, I would need a historian to help us out here. We know it was built somewhere in the 1970s and was taken offline in about 2012. So that's well into our story about where did the water go. But this guy threw a wrench into things. It didn't just take water, it put it back in the creek. So as far as we understand, and we're learning more, we actually have some state funding to study this particular topic. It has some really deep groundwater wells it's able to draw cold water from, pumps it up. It helped the fish swim around in those, kept the tanks clean, discharged back into Scatter Creek. So it's taking that deep groundwater and making that into surface water. And this timeline we're looking at, 70s through 2012, that's the timeline of the lifetime of many, many people that live there, or at least their, known memory. So a lot of our citizens, our residents that live along the creek are like, wait, Scatter Creek used to have a ton of water. What are you talking about? And that was because this aquaculture facility was pumping water into the creek artificially. So my same little diagram here that I was like, oops, fish kill. This blue line is the period of time, this particular one, between 1993 and 2011. 20 CFS, bam, in that creek. Later, 2013 to 2025, no flow during that time. So aquaculture facility, artificially irrigating that creek.
So that measure was taken downstream of the.
Yeah. It was taken at the bridge where you saw the girls with the long dresses. So that, yeah.
Downstream.
Downstream. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I don't know how they treated it, but obviously they got permits to do it. So yeah. They were shut down. They had bad practices up in the Puget Sound. They were responsible for the net pen release by Lopez. I don't remember where it was, but yeah. So they got shut down for bad practices in Puget Sound. We don't know what was going on in this area. So it's kind of a weird one because it's like they were helping the creek for a long time. They were providing year-round flow for the first 6 miles of the creek for most of our lifetime. And then they turned this off in 2012, and there's been dry areas ever since. So it's a weird phenomena. All right, last one, last culprit. Climate change. So I learned this in my master's study, this great little quote. If climate change is a dragon, water is its teeth. Yes. So we feel the effects of climate change, both through temperature and drought and flooding. We feel it through water acting out of the normal range. So we know climate change is here, and we know it's definitely impacting the hydrological cycle. We have some research that's showing that by 2080, the decrease in flows in Scatter Creek specifically will be between 16 and 22%. So already pretty low. It's going to get lower still. So this is a pending culprit. This is a future culprit, but it's going to add on to all these other things that we've been learning about. All right, so enough doom and gloom. We like to do things. We're engineers. We're ingenious, we like to solve problems and figure out how to resolve all of these issues that I've just explained. So each of these problems needs a strategy to address it. As we're looking back over what we've just learned, does anybody have strong feelings about one of these being maybe a bigger culprit than others? No, you're not going to take any sides of the bad guys. Yeah, they're all probably contributing. We don't know how much. So yeah, we need to, and we being all of us collectively, and this is, you know, my study kind of ended at this point about what the problems are. We need to figure out how to offset and reverse some of those problems if we're going to have salmon back in this creek, the levels that are even supportable by that system. So lucky for us, there's a lot of researchers and groups that I already mentioned that are really interested in solving some of these problems. And there's been research on how to address these problems. So wherever stream flows are low, in Scatter Creek, they're particularly low, but all across our region, we're going to see the teeth of climate change, temperature, low summer base flow. We know this, it's happening already, and it's projected to be worse. So we need to start thinking about scaling up and ramping up all of the actions that you see here. So like the left-hand corner, that's pretending to be a beaver by putting in some beaver dam analogs, taking actions to reconnect the floodplain where there's those ditches, that might be a little harder, where the stream seal has been punctured. Reducing water uptake through promoting mature forests. I could go into that for a while, but that's a great action that helps our watersheds. And then all the way to the right side where we can think about our consumptive use and our whatever units those were on that pie chart. How can we reduce that number to be less, to reduce our summer outdoor use, which is the most damaging. Go ahead. It is not. It drains into Black. Yes. But their headwaters tickle each other. Yeah. The same issues, just maybe a little bit different shallow aquifer level. All right. So this poster over here, some of you have already been digging into it. This is the recommendations coming out of our report. A lot of detailed strategies. Again, just beginning of the story. I welcome you to go check it out after the talk. This is some of the key recommendations coming out of that study. One of those filling data gaps. So that's kind of, do we need to go into figuring out how much of a problem each of these issues is? And figuring out, you know, is there a way that we can reverse that? Like, do we bother going in on really understanding how much of a problem the stream seal puncture issue is? Like how potentially big of a problem could that be in these watersheds? So that's be a really important data gap. Prioritize areas to work. We don't have infinite money, unfortunately. We've already did this week. We had a little prioritization exercise and we narrowed down some of our areas where the experts think it'd be best to work. So that's happened. Super important recommendation, building landowner relationships. So that's another factor I didn't mention on this landscape. You hear about restoration happening. You often hear about it on public land. Most of Scatter Creek is private land. And so if we're like, hey, we need to get rid of the reed canary grass, how are we going to do that? Well, you're not going to do it without private landowners being on board with that action. And not just that kind of, you know, residential homeowner, but places like aquaculture, they're private landowner. So you had a question?
Corporations out that use that water.
So new, yeah. So they're going to be a private user, but a future private user. Community engagement around beaver coexistence. So people are responsible for killing the beaver and relocating them. Get them to love the beaver. That's an ongoing need across our whole Pacific Northwest and the Southwest, I think, as well. It's a really big tool. Let's see. How am I doing on time? I'm almost done. Got about 2 minutes. All good? Okay. I'll dig into a few more recommendations. I don't have a slide for each, but so enhance rearing habitat. So I think an important recommendation is thinking about the timing that the salmon are in the system and who's negatively affected. Overall, it's those little tiny baby fish when they're trying to emerge from the gravel and begin their life when the creek is dry and they're trying to emerge, they're not going to do so well. So we really need to think about strategies to help out pools, keep them cool, keep them wet, so that the juveniles can survive that life stage. We do have a recommendation to manage that reed canary grass. Again, I said it's virtually impossible to eradicate, but you know, we can do some things that help. We can try to shade it out through planting larger trees. Maybe we can mow it if we're private landowners to keep it from growing to that above the head's height. And you know, adding beaver ponds is going to create more of that year-round water as well. As I mentioned, the reed canary grass, it's perfect if it's intermittent water, kind of boggy areas. Water's over a certain height, you won't see it being quite so dominant. So there's some actions we can take to combat that particular villain. Identify and implement water conservation. So whether it's through industrial water or home use, we can reduce that through hopefully voluntary actions. And protect stream flow in forested uplands. So I'm going to go to this next chart. Even as we work to understand what the problems are, what we can do, there's already people out there on the ground trying to do some work, and they've been funded to do so. So we're really lucky in the Chehalis. We've had some funding sources come through from the state, both the Offices of Chehalis and Ecology Streamflow Restoration Program that have funded work there. At the time this graphic was made, what do we have going on? There was a feasibility study to look at that cook aquaculture water rate. So we're definitely exploring, can we basically do what cook aquaculture had been doing for lots of years, but without fish farm part of it? So can we just invest in the equipment to pump up that groundwater and pump it back into the creek? Because we've got now how many generations of fish that we're used to that regime of water in the lower part of Skyler Creek. So I don't know about the answer to that. That's being studied right now, but that might actually be a possible solution. We've also got some conservation districts designing some in-stream actions at the very bottom of the creek, working with excited beaver-loving property owners down there that want to do the best thing for their creek. So they're capitalizing on that enthusiasm and interest and saying, okay, we're going to start designing projects that are good to enhance the conditions in this area that we know have flow and spawning habitat. And there's also some headwater work happening in the far right. That's the area known as Cozy Valley. So that's been under some restoration planning work for quite a number of years. There's some conservation of land through Creekside Conservancy, and they're trying to figure out what they can do to enhance the floodplain, keep the water on there a little longer. Just heard a half-hour presentation about that study the other day. Happy to put you in touch with that researcher if you want to learn more about what they're doing. Super exciting options. So these are projects underway, and we're likely going to ramp up to do even more projects now that we have some of this research done. And last but not least, citizen science. Woohoo! So since 2021, been working with citizen volunteers to help answer the question of when and where the creek goes dry. And you can see that information is really the foundation of anything we can do to restore the creek. So these are just people that are like, hey, I walk out by this refuge, or hey, I have a creek going through my land. I call them up, or I text them, or I send them an email once every 2 weeks, and they say, yes, there's water, yes, it's flowing, or it's not, or it's just a pool. So super basic information they're gathering about water presence, and that really fills a lot of gaps that state funded or federal funded scientists can't answer because it's on private land. So if you live in Scatter Creek or know somebody that does, really encourage you guys to join that citizen science program. Easy and fun. And the second to the last slide here is just thanking the multitude of organizations and people that contributed to this work and are still working in Scatter Creek to make it a better place. Really see that there's a huge diversity of folks that I've been working with over the last 2 to 3 years on this project. And citizen science volunteers, they're in the right, but certainly not the last. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
The level of the aquifer. And because I assume if the aquifer is going down, at some point it's going to go down below the creek bed, and you're going to lose water on the creek.
Mhm.
So is there anything looking at the level, how the aquifer level changes, or has changed over the years?
I know you have a hydrologist at Thurston County that has been doing a ton of work, and kind of the county's been collecting data on this aquifer for quite a long time. And so they're kind of the best. They're in a place using the existing monitoring data to create a model. So they're creating kind of a surface water, groundwater model to help understand what's been happening and potential trends. So relative to other parts of the Chehalis, there's a lot of information about the aquifer here. And there's also been USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service have done, what do you call it? They walk the creek and they find losing areas and gaining areas, and that's mapped. I'm not sure if this map has it, but it shows that some areas of the creek are always kind of losing water into the groundwater, and some areas are always receiving it. So basically the blue dots you see there, it's always receiving water from a part of the aquifer. It's just, I don't know how else to describe it, as the pool is like this and the creek kind of comes and touches that groundwater level at different places. Yeah, so that's part of I mean, you could say that's part of where the water goes, is it goes to the groundwater. But it's your question, is there a trend in groundwater going down? We're seeing less of surface flow. Go ahead.
So,
I tell people I'm state funded, my grant comes through a county, and I'm employed by a tribe. It's complicated, but this helps. I work with a lot of stakeholders, so I don't, you don't necessarily belong to any of those organizations. Go ahead.
So on the previous slide, I was looking at all the different folks that are involved, and I realized it's mainly rural, but I don't see any industry. I don't see gravel mines or anybody like that who's helping out. And while I may use a little bit of water from my private well, I'm not using it like an industry. So how are they?
How do we talk to
helping out or being shamed for not helping out? Or
that's a fantastic question. If anybody has ideas on how to engage industry,
So,
we're all ears.
follow up on that.
Yeah.
What high water use industries are now in Scatter Creek area? I mean, the Cook Aqua one is closed,
Mm-hmm.
so that's off. So who's on it?
Not a ton of industries. There's a lot of agriculture, pumping. We've got Tenino, Rochester.
City water.
Yeah.
I think Toronto's comes out of a different outlet.
Tenino's comes out of Springs, just uphill from the town. Yeah. So waters of the state are state owned. So if I'm a private person and I want to walk up the middle of the creek, I can say this is my land, this is state land, but everything outside of that is private. So you as a homeowner, you might have a property that goes all the way up to the edge of the creek. And, you know, again, I'm walking down the middle of the creek. I'm like, shoot, there's a cow pooping here. I have to talk to that person that owns the land to get, so there's permissions needed to do any restoration work.
Are there laws at this point to keep like fencing to keep cattle out of the actual?
Oof.
There's laws.
There's laws, but yeah. And you know, the landowners will fairly say, you know, fencing's expensive. How can I pay for fencing? Yeah. And there's variable like agriculture is regulated differently than urban. So yeah, every land use has its own set of challenges. Question from my mother.
Resources, necessary resources. Which one of those villains would you choose to attack first?
I would choose beaver, probably. They're charismatic, people like them. It's low engineering. We as humans, we really are proud of ourselves. We're doing big engineering projects. Beaver are the biggest engineers after us. Just put them back in the creek, let them do their work. They'll help. Yeah.
So at this point, I mean, we have our tax dollars are paying to kill beaver. What is it called? They changed their name.
Yeah.
Animal Services.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, cities do it, counties,
timber,
DFW, you know, people kill beaver.
so we have to change that law.
We do. There's an exciting opportunity though. Cook aquaculture would be the perfect place to have a beaver relocation program. Because if you move a beaver from the land, somebody says, "Ew, I don't want that beaver." You need to give it a couple days to kind of acclimate and get all the lice out of its system. And it needs a nice watery place. So if we can create the Scatter Creek Beaver Rehabilitation Program, we can put the beaver in new places. But oh gosh, it's going to be millions. Yeah, I don't know. And they would look for state funding. I mean, we've got the state stream flow restoration funding. Their favorite is wet water. So yeah, but they're not, yeah, we don't know what's gonna happen if they're willing sellers or not at this point. Go ahead.
Online. They're being sued by an environmental group for dumping water. Just the same thing that they did here, they're doing it at a dozen sites in the state of Maine.
Oh,
They have been banned from the West Coast because of their practices. And so they just moved across the country and are now being sued by an environmental group. Their practices.
Oof.
Sounds like someone could go after them.
But even if we're able to acquire the water rights, Cook, start pumping that water again like they were doing, that only takes care of the bottom 7, 8 miles. of the creek.
6.6,
Hmm?
6 or 7 miles. Yeah.
Yeah, so everything
Mhm.
there on
Yeah.
isn't being affected by that
Right.
particular strategy.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, in terms of my mother's question, what would you do first? There's limited resources. Like this would provide 6 miles of prime cold coho rearing habitat forever, but it's the most expensive, most challenging project probably. All right. Well, let's hope, yeah, folks get to work and have some cards if you want to have more questions or help out or tell more people. I'd like to give this talk in communities in Tenino and that area too, so people know what's happening in their backyards.